A member of the other side of the aisle on this very committee called you a traitor and said, I quote, "In a better society, Quislings," referring to the leader of Norway during World War II who collaborated with the Nazis, "like the strange," I won't use the words used by our colleague, "General Milley would be hung," unquote. General Milley, what's your reaction to those statements about you, especially given you and your family's long service, distinguished service to the United States of America, as we're discussing patriotism and protecting troops? I wonder how you respond to the kind of slander I've just read attributed to two prominent political figures.
Obviously, I don't agree with the comments, but it's a free country and people can say what they want. But with all due respect, Congressman, I'm here for the families of Abbey Gate. I'm here for the families of those that served in Afghanistan. And I'll leave those comments, as much as I don't care for those comments, I don't agree with them. They have a right to say them, but I'd like to stay focused on these families if with respect.
I think that's very much in keeping with the honorable tradition you've set in your own career and your own good name.
Don't you agree that the vaccine should have put into the fund, or face liability issues? Because the people were used as guinea pigs. Do you believe in peer-reviewed science? Because there's another part that didn't get really reviewed very well.
Well, I'll remind you again, we always have to do studies or clinical trials to figure out the risks and the benefits. That's a normal part in most of my career. I personally participate in clinical trials when I have the chance, so that we can have the data and the knowledge to make wise decisions. For example, and get vaccinated so we're less likely to be dead.
I get that, but why did you have to retract everything you said about ivermectin? Because your office came out against ivermectin. Now, I agree that there's some problems in the manufacturing of that dosage, but if in doubt, leave it out.
Well, we didn't retract everything we had to say about ivermectin. And in fact, you posited that we had an attack against ivermectin. Drugs are not.
I hope the courts are watching this right now, because they ordered you to.
If you look at the randomized trials of ivermectin, and there are many of them now, there is no benefit of ivermectin in the treatment of COVID. That's a statement, just a fact.
I'm going to follow up on this, because this exchange to me was extremely illuminating, because what we have here is the commissioner who's the head of the Food and Drug Administration, and then we get a drive-by spray of propaganda, disinformation, and ideological attacks. So let me try to sort some of this out, and maybe we'll help to illuminate why we have a Food and Drug Administration rather than leaving it to politicians in state legislatures or in Congress to make decisions based on ideological whim.
I rise today in support of H.R. 2925, the Mining Regulatory Clarity Act, offered by the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amadei. H.R. 2925 would resolve harmful permitting uncertainty and litigation delays caused by a harmful 2019 rogue court decision known as the Rosemont decision. This decision revoked a previously approved mine plan to my great state of Arizona, ignoring 40 years of federal permitting and land management regulations. Congress should act to remedy the fallout created by Rosemont and must work to expedite mine permitting and build up domestic mineral supply chains. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill that would provide much-needed certainty for domestic mining projects.
We have heard repeatedly from across the aisle that mining pollution is a thing of the past, that today's modern mining industry operates under the highest environmental standards, and that after the mining operations stop, the industry cleans up after itself. If that sounds too good to be true, it's because it is. If we're going to allow a toxic mining free-for-all, we should at least make sure that taxpayers are not footing the bill. After all, this bill opens up our lands to our foreign adversaries, and I don't expect them to clean up after themselves out of the goodness of their hearts.
The subcommittee today is meeting to hear the testimony on the impacts of the Department of Interior's remote and telework policies. We will examine the Department of Interior's telework and remote work policies and their effect on the delivery services to Americans. And to be clear, I recognize that telework and remote work can be useful in limited and well-defined circumstances. However, DOI has abused their excessive telework and remote work policies for employees at a time when even President Joe Biden is calling for a return to the office.
My colleagues have cherry-picked the evidence to support their claim that we need to return to pre-pandemic telework postures. But most of the research shows that telework flexibility is a net positive for employers and employees alike. That's probably why a 2023 survey of House employees shows Republicans use it for their own staff. COVID opened our eyes to the advantages of telework. We can't and shouldn't ignore those lessons. And it's not so much about government agencies being unproductive. It is about being under-resourced, but also overwhelmed by Republican hearing committee gotcha agendas that refocus their energies on showing up and performing here rather than doing the work for the American people.
Chair recognizes Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to both of our witnesses. General Milley, as an American, I want to thank you for your service and for how you've conducted yourself in that service. America owes you a debt. You come from my hometown of Boston, just outside Boston, if I understand it correctly. Your father fought in World War II in the 4th Marine Division in the Pacific, is that correct? And your mother was a nurse who served in the U.S. Naval Reserve during that same war, is that correct?
She worked at a hospital out in Seattle, took care of the wounded, that's correct.
And you had an uncle who served in the Korean War.
I had two uncles that were also in World War II, one in the Philippines and one was landing at Normandy when my dad was at Saipan, and another uncle that was in the Korean War.
So it'd be fair to say your family really answered a call to serve its country, including bearing arms to protect this country and to deter its adversaries and enemies. Is that correct?
That's correct. And two uncles in World War I and cousins in Vietnam.
Ah, even going further.
That's right.
And then you yourself deployed in Somalia, Panama, Haiti, and multiple times as brigade commander to Iraq and Afghanistan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You're proud of that service?
44 years. Proud.
Are you proud of that service?
Absolutely, 100%.
And then a retired Colonel Ross Davidson, who served under you in Baghdad, recounted one incident where you ran across a booby-trapped bridge at night in order to prevent a pair of U.S. tanks from blowing up and thus save lives. Is that incident accurate?
It's correct.
General Milley, on a Truth Social post on September 22nd of last year, Donald J. Trump said, talking about you, quote, "This guy turned out to be a woke train wreck who, if the fake news reporting is correct, was actually dealing with China to give them a heads up on the thinking of the President of the United States. This is an act so egregious that in times gone by, the punishment would have been death," unquote. As a member of this body, I want to let you know, I find those comments inconsistent with the honor we're trying to bestow on those who lost loved ones, who have served and served nobly their country. You deserve that honor and respect too. And those kinds of comments are dangerous and unbefitting anybody, from my point of view, who serves or seeks to serve public office. And as a member of this committee, I want you to know I renounce them, and I have a very different view of your service. Thank you for serving the American people. I yield back.
But let's start with ivermectin, which I believe is an animal deworming agent that some people were advocating for use to treat COVID-19. Has this been approved as a form of treatment or a cure for COVID-19?
No, it has not, if I may. I should also point out, it also has benefit for humans with worms, which is a huge problem in Asia. So it actually won a Nobel Prize because it's an amazing drug, both for animals and humans who have worms. And there was a good reason to think it may work in the case of COVID, and that's why, thankfully, the community, including the NIH, did a number of randomized clinical trials. There's just no benefit, and you know, that's true of most things that we try. There's nothing wrong with thinking it might work, It just didn't.
Well, what about hydroxychloroquine, which was another thing that was advocated?
Basically the same story. There was really exciting preliminary work in the laboratory that said hydroxychloroquine may have activity against COVID, so the randomized trials were done. Unfortunately, no benefit. Again, nothing wrong with thinking it may work and trying it out in a randomized trial, but then we have the data now, so that leads you to the conclusion. So we have not been able to grant an indication for those.
I mean, I'm aware of a lot of political attacks and criticism against the FDA, but I can never figure out the coherence of it. Sometimes they seem to be saying, get out of the way and just let anybody advocate whatever they want and use whatever they want without any testing and without the various protocols you go through. And then other times they attack you because you don't have enough authority to do the things that we would want you to do in order to make kids' cinnamon applesauce clean, for example. So let's take that one, which has caught my eye, since we certainly ate a lot of cinnamon applesauce in our house when our kids were little. Let's see. Your FDA-regulated products are manufactured or handled at something like 275 or 280,000 different registered facilities across the land. So what keeps you from inspecting every private manufacturing facility that produces things like cinnamon applesauce or peanut butter?
Well, if I may, I'll try to do this very quickly. I think the best way to think about FDA in general is that we're referees. You all in Congress actually write the rule book, much like in any sport. It's the leadership that writes the rule book. We enact what's in the rule book. And in the case of food establishments, like most sports, the first line of defense are the players in the game, which is the industry that produces the products. And by and large, they do a great job, but sometimes they don't. And as referees, we have to be really wise about where we step in because we don't have an unlimited budget. So what keeps us from inspecting all 275,000? You don't have to be a brilliant mathematician to know how many people you'd have to have. But what we can do, for example, in food for children, is to have the manufacturers be required to do the testing, which is the way the drug system works. The manufacturers of drugs have to test every batch. And in the case of cinnamon and applesauce, if there had been mandatory testing, when it got imported into the U.S. from Ecuador, the stores that were selling it probably would have picked it up at that point.
And those kids ended up with lead poisoning, right?
Right. Lead poisoning is a very serious problem, as you know, and it causes chronic issues.
So you advocated mandatory testing. You would like us to give you that regulatory authority.
Yes.
And I do hope that's something that our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle would join us in. In the case of infant formula shortages, last Congress we passed a bipartisan bill to help address those shortages, but nearly 200 House Republicans voted against a second bill to give FDA resources to strengthen its oversight and inspection of facilities to prevent shortages like that from happening. So we can't have it both ways. If we want an effective, strong regulator, we've got to give them the authority and the resources to get the job done. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
And I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Kamlager-Dove.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's be clear, telework and remote work works. Workers want it because it makes them more productive and reduces stress by avoiding commutes. It has been life-changing for parents, military spouses, people with disabilities, and others who have access to more job opportunities and better work-life balance. Employers want it because it helps attract the best talent. New mothers want it because it helps them manage postpartum depression, motherhood, and life, and getting to Congress. So let's continue to put this into perspective. We know now that 2023 was the hottest year on record by a wide margin, and the rate of warming over the past century has no precedent. We also had record-breaking temperatures in our oceans, with marine heat waves occurring all over the globe. Concentrations of carbon dioxide and methane, two major greenhouse gases, also hit new highs. And the consequences are all around us: extreme weather, floods, droughts, wildfires, new disease outbreaks. It's getting worse, and addressing it will require resources, coordination, and commitment on an unprecedented scale. 72% of the American people know that climate change is happening every day, not 4 times a year. But what are we here to do today? We are micromanaging where people's duty stations are and how often they have to commute. Luckily, Democrats and the Biden administration are pulling our weight. Under Democratic leadership, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which had historic investments for addressing the climate crisis. Now the Department of Interior is working diligently and effectively to implement them both. In my home state of California, Interior recently awarded about $295 million to protect the Colorado River Basin, enabling us to conserve up to 643,000 acre-feet of water through next year to better protect constituents against the impacts of historic droughts and the climate crisis. That kind of commitment is what it will take. And this type of action is what my colleagues on the other side oppose. The Biden-Harris administration is getting the work done, remotely, hybrid, and in person. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I yield back.